First of all, Happy New Year! Now, you might be thinking I'm getting extremely repetitive, and you're right, I've been talking about the genesis of Teyvat for like the past 5 videos already, which is why today it's gonna be slightly different. In my last video, I gave you some homework to do, I asked you some questions, and through them I actually thought about things I never considered before. Today instead, I'll try to be Screwllum. I'll use his
logic
to make a
deduction,
ask a
question,
make a
suggestion,
and even a
prediction.
But above all, this is meant to be a group effort, so the video will only be complete with your input in the comment section in order to try and figure this out once and for all. But first, this is a theory video and leaks are prohibited in the comment section. I will use information available in the game, but my theories and conclusions are not to be considered the official lore of the game, unless I got something right and it's confirmed in a little update of the game itself. Well then, grab your favorite curio and let's get this video started. Nibelung was born alongside his planet that lies at the edge of a spiral galaxy, and many believed he created the other dragon sovereigns just like he did with the moon goddesses.
Deduction.
Xucoatl was said to have come to life from phlogiston, which seems to mean that the dragon sovereigns, Nibelung included, were simply born from their specific elements on their own.
Logic.
Each sovereign also ruled over a specific nation or, as Pep called it, a domain.
Question.
If there are 7 sovereigns and 7 nations, where did Nibelung live?
Conjecture.
There might be a place that hasn't been mentioned in the game yet, or it could be the floating island of Celestia, since in the manga they showed some dragons flying over it, but it could also be Canria, since it's technically an actual nation.
Suggestion.
Like in Kanemia, Canria might have been on the surface in the past, but since it's under the desert of Sumeru, it might not be Nibelung's place. At some point, the Voyager, an intergalactic anthropologist basically, sensed Nibelung's will and sent her mind to his planet to meet him.
Suggestion.
The Voyager defined the sun of this solar system as a fleeting ember that, like others she saw in the past, was about to be torn by the lightless end.
Question.
Was the solar system about to collapse due to the sun's imminent death?
Deduction.
The abyss, clearly a natural occurrence of the universe, sounds like entropy, the natural process that will eventually cause the heat death of the universe, aka the Big Freeze, which kinda fits with Skirk using the abyss to call forth cryo while talking about stars going out. Back to the Voyager, she told Nibelung that his planet would eventually be destroyed and asked him to leave it and its people to flee with her, but Nibelung declined the offer, asking her to witness how he would have brought his people to the stars on his own.
Logic.
The Voyager clearly comes from a highly advanced civilization, so living with her would have given Nibelung a greater chance of figuring out a solution to the problem, and yet he didn't, even though he fell in love with her.
Question.
The Voyager defined Nibelung as a will bound to the planet's surface by duty, which almost sounds like he couldn't live even if he wanted to. So how come he eventually left? Next, we need to talk about the moons.
Logic.
The moons already existed when the Voyager met Nibelung for the first time, since she noticed how they had changed when she came back. And the moon goddesses look human, despite the fact that the humans hadn't been created yet. Plus, Nibelung created the moons to watch over the planet because he had decided to live, but he refused to live with the Voyager, which sounds contradictory.
Deduction.
The Voyager might have stayed with Nibelung for quite some time, just like she stayed for a very long time when she came back. So Nibelung might have created the moons when she was still there and made the goddesses look like her, also considering he apparently fell in love with her, and then left the planet, leaving it into the goddesses' hands for safekeeping.
Suggestion.
My viewers also came up with the idea that the goddesses looked draconic until the Reaver arrived, when they changed their appearance to blend in with the humans the Reaver created in order not to be seen as enemies, which is a completely reasonable theory. Now, Nibelung left the planet.
Deduction.
He might have been looking for a way to save his people, or maybe a new place for them to move in order to avoid the inevitable destruction.
Question.
Could it be that the Eternal Throne didn't arrive on the Dragon's planet by coincidence, but instead Nibelung met it while traveling through space?
Conjecture.
Nibelung might have struck a deal with the Eternal Throne since they could have been in a similar situation. They were both looking for a new place to stay, so while Nibelung kept traveling in search of a suitable planet for both of them, the Eternal Throne would have protected his planet from the death of the sun and from the abyss, while also temporarily giving the humans a place to live.
Probability.
When the Eternal Throne arrived, the sovereigns obviously didn't believe that it made a deal with Nibelung, so they tried to fight them off as invaders. The Eternal Throne sent out the Primordial One to fight them, who also created the Shades so that they could keep their end of the deal, protecting the planet by placing it inside an egg, shielding it from danger. Once the Primordial One won, it split the world in 3 realms. One for the humans on the Eternal Throne, but also the dragons, one for the primordial elements since they are toxic to the humans, and one to get rid of the abyss that naturally existed on the planet.
Logic.
In Before Sun and Moon, the first years after the humans had been created sounded like a paradise on Earth. They didn't live in fear even though the dragons were obviously living on the same planet, so even if the dragons didn't appreciate the situation, it seems like everybody was coexisting just fine. Now, the dragons tried to make primal fire mimic humans in order to create a new race of beings, but this project failed when the Heavenly Principles arrived.
Logic.
This experiment had to take place after the Primordial One created the humans, but before the Heavenly Principles arrived, so they must be 2 separate entities.
Suggestion.
Another project that failed with their arrival involved the Tonatiuh as a means to leave the planet. Since Ochkan spun the Tonatiuh around, it was probably meant to face downwards, so that the dragons could use those circles as an elevator to get to the sky. By the way, if you unite those circles, it kinda looks like a moon. Anyway, recently lots of people began believing that the Primordial One created the Heavenly Principles, so they now acknowledge the possibility of them being 2 entities and not the same one, but I have a different theory.
Deduction.
The kingdom established among the heavens is the Eternal Throne. The first heir is the Primordial One, reason why the Shades are women, and the second crowned heir is the Heavenly Principles, whose crown refers to the circlet of Logos, aka the crown of reason. This is the Gnostic chorus, so it refers to Gnosticism, which means that the Primordial One might actually be the Aeon of Wisdom Sophia, who created the Demiurge, who in turn created the imperfect world and the imperfect humans, while the Heavenly Principles are the Aeon of Will Theletos, Sophia's syzygy, her male counterpart, who saved the imperfect humans by giving them spiritual knowledge, aka Gnosis.
Logic.
The Heavenly Principles are spoken of as a mechanical god, just like the Demiurge is in Euphorius, a planet in Stariel that curiously referenced Teyvat multiple times.
Conjecture.
The Primordial One created the world and the humans but was corrupted by the Abyss and descended as a new ruler of the Void Realm, which means that the Abyss's invasion might be her attempt to conquer the human realm she created, while the Heavenly Principles were sent to complete her work and also to save the world and the humans.
Probability.
The dragons probably didn't care to make a distinction between these 2 entities because they represent evil to them, which might be a play around the fact that the Christian God is just one, even though it's vengeful in the Old Testament and loving in the New Testament, so it almost sounds like they are 2 completely different gods. Only in Teyvat, it's the other way around. The Primordial One is a loving mother, while the Heavenly Principles is
like a strict and unfeeling father.
Which is reflected in how Pitcairn is defined as a father of all and mother of the gods.
Question.
What in Teyvat is the Genesis Pearl? Did the Heavenly Principles even find it in the end? Moving on, the Heavenly Principles created the Angels, which apparently wove the fake sky, and they were tasked with selflessly helping all humans equally.
Logic.
Although the humans and the angels were created by the same entities, for some reason the humans ended up worshipping the moon goddesses and refused the angels' help. The problem is that across the unified nation, some cities like Salvindagnir or the people who fled to Chanyu Vale worshipped and depended on the angels, while in Hyperborea's case, it's a mess honestly. They revered Koitar, the first angel, who lived in a domain underneath Hyperborea. They worked with her to create the Fae when she rebelled, but Nicole, one of the angels assigned to Hyperborea, told us that they refused the angels' help and only worshipped the moon goddesses.
Conclusion.
And I'm stretching this to make it make sense, but maybe they were fearful of the angels, so they quote-unquote accepted their help only because they had no other choice, and this could be evident in how terrified they were of Koitar the one time they somehow offended her. At this point, Xuquatl and the 11th Lord went to the moons to ask for their help and also to figure out where Nibelung had gone, but they gave them no answer, probably because of Aposelinia's plan, and if you wanna know more about it, you can watch my previous video, link is in the description. This should be when the Heavenly Principles stole the dragon's authorities, except for Xuquatl since he fled into the volcano of Toland, which for some reason the Heavenly Principles never managed to breach. So to keep him quiet they froze him in lava, causing his fake death, which basically means he went into hibernation like a lizard or a snake, but this should also be when the water dragon died.
Logic.
Although we don't know who gave it to them, the people of Enkanomiya received a prophecy according to which the water dragon would have come back to life among the baptismal bishops, but as a human with a cane. But this city fell underground before the War of Funerary Flame had ended, which means that the Hydra Dragon must have died before Nibelung returned in order to give them some time to receive that prophecy.
Deduction.
Egeria was an artificial water dragon. Although Naberius, her creator, was a ruler of humans, so someone who came from beyond the world, she created Egeria using only materials that originally belonged to the world, and then she was given the part of authority that the Heavenly Principles stole from the real sovereign, so that the Primordial Sea would recognize her as the new water dragon. As Cassiodor told us, as long as Egeria stayed in the Primordial Sea, the real water dragon couldn't be reborn, so Egeria was essentially created not to use the Primordial Sea, but only to prevent the Sovereign's return.
Logic.
Egeria was imprisoned in the Primordial Sea only after she created the Oceanid people, which means that before that she should have been free to leave the Primordial Sea, at least for a while.
Conclusion.
This could be the reason why she is depicted on the surface when Celestia punished her. When Nibelung came back corrupted by the Abyss more than 6,000 years ago and saw what had happened, he lost his cool and fought the Heavenly Principles in the War of Funerary Flame.
Probability.
He might have found a new planet to move to, so he came back to load everyone on the Eternal Throne since it's an arc, but he probably got too close to the Abyss while looking for this planet and accidentally got corrupted by it.
Question.
If their king couldn't even control the Abyss, why did the Sovereigns decide to use it against the Heavenly Principles?
Deduction.
They probably learned from his mistake, since Apep told us that if analyzed in controlled doses, she could comprehend and use the Abyss.
Logic.
Nibelung didn't hand the Abyss to the dragons, he probably shared it through their minds like Deshret later did in Sumeru, because Xuquatl was still in hibernation in the volcano, and he suddenly woke up already corrupted, so he probably didn't expect it, nor was he in any condition to analyze it at all. When it comes to the moon goddesses instead, they had no idea what to do since their creator got corrupted by the abyss, so he became a threat to the world they had to protect, until the fourth moon, Hyposelenia, came up with a plan to save the world from both the Heavenly Principles and Nibelung.
Deduction.
Alice told us that the first trilunar syzygy happened during this war, so the goddesses tried to converge their powers into one body, but they failed, probably because of the iridescent moon. As before, the link to the video explaining this plan is in the description. In the end, the three goddesses were imprisoned beyond the fake sky. Nibelung reconstructed the moons into weapons, apparently to amplify his powers, as we saw on this mural. He still lost and died, but he did manage to severely damage the Heavenly Principles. At this point, Teyvat had considerably changed. The mechanical moons are still in the sky for now, the moon goddesses are in prison, the edge of the human realm has been damaged, so the abyss is pouring into it, Natlan's ley lines had been destroyed, and most sovereigns had died except for Apep, Xuquatl who fled into the volcano again, and I'm more than certain also Ashdaha, since in Chinese he says he's as old as the mountains and oceans, so he was born alongside the planet as well. As for the other dragons, we can use what Apep told us to understand what happened to them.
Deduction.
Some of them came back to life, forgot their past grievances and befriended the Archons. This refers to Dvalin and Neuvillette, who forgot the past because they didn't have their full authorities anymore. Ashdaha also befriended Rex Lapis, but as before I don't think he's a reincarnation, while many players tend to forget that Nibelung has also already come back to life during the Archon War, but it seems he never forgot the past. Some others decided to stay dead, and this refers to Xuquatl after Xbalanque defeated him during the Archon War, since there was no hint about him wanting to be reborn. Lastly, some fled from pain and suffering and never came back, which should be the Electro or Lightning Dragon, since we never heard a hint about its existence in Inazuma. When it comes to the Cryo or Ice Dragon, we know nothing about it, so we don't know in which category it fits. Now, the Heavenly Principles haven't entered sleep mode yet because the world is in shambles. Since the Light Realm can annihilate the Abyss, they split Phlogiston in 7 inferior elements, probably to make it less toxic, and gave them to the humans as a weapon against the Abyss. They also reworked Irminsul and the ley lines into a girdle to defend the planet and allowed Huacoltecotin, aided by the other angels and Renova, to create the Night Kingdom to replace the missing ley lines of Teyvat. Furthermore, they introduced Fate for the Murals, which is tied to both the rules of Teyvat and the Irminsul fruits.
Deduction.
Irminsul most likely existed since the inception of the world, but it used to have a different purpose, probably tied to the dragons, considering how Ashdaha lost his memories when the people damaged the ley lines in the chasm. Although this was defined as erosion, it's a different kind compared to what the morals suffer from if they live for too long.
Logic.
Apart from reason, which we still don't know how it works, the rules of Teyvat are life, death, space, and time. Originally, the moon goddesses ruled over these domains, but this task was later given to the Shades, which made the moon goddesses redundant and obsolete, hence the world began rejecting them.
Deduction.
Under the moon goddesses, the rules work differently. The dragons were and still are eternal, they can't die, and they could use limitless flows of pure energies. The Shades instead applied these rules to the mortals. The world was shackled by these laws, probably to prevent mortals from evolving like the dragons.
Logic.
Fate is very simple to explain. Teyvat and its inhabitants are like a book. The front and back covers are the rule of space, so everything within will always be protected by this shield. The first empty page is the rule of life. The book will always have a beginning. The other pages are the rule of time, so how long the book will be, while the last page is the rule of death. It will always have an ending. These are fixed rules, they can't be avoided, they will always be true. Fate instead is what's written in the book. It's not a rule, you can tweak it by changing your calligraphy, it can be hastened by writing bigger or delayed by writing smaller. But in the end, even if you take away the first page, the next one will become the new first page, and if you remove the last page, the previous one will become the new last page. So fate cannot affect the rules in any possible way.
Conclusion.
Since the fate of the mortals is written in the stars, the Irminsul fruits that contain their memories and experiences, erosion happens when a person lives for so long that the stars, like hard drives, get full, so they start erasing the oldest data to make space for new one, hence deleting the core memories that make people who they are, losing their minds as a consequence. A little more than 6,000 years ago, the Voyager came back and saw that the world had completely changed, so she sent her mind into the world inside the egg, possessed a young boy, Suetervoinen, later known as the Apostle, to figure out what had happened by listening to the people of Hyperborea. She, now he, then met Koitar, the first angel, and told her who he was, so Koitar fell in love and told him the secrets of Teyvat. This led them to rebel against the heavenly principles, which was witnessed by the moons.
Deduction.
Since the story mentions their feelings, we're talking about the moon goddesses beyond the fake sky, who are still alive, rather than the mechanical moons. Koitar then gave the people of Hyperborea the authority of creation, which was used to create the Fae.
Deduction.
This is how the Sacred Heir project that would have birthed the Moon Maiden, a perfect being that could merge with the world, began, so the Fae are the first imperfect version of Columbina.
Logic.
The authority over creation should be in Naberius' heart, which remained buried in Koitar's domain until recently, when Rhine-Daughter and Albedo found it.
Conjecture.
Naberius might have been punished for what Egeria did, a reason why she lost her shape and was turned into a heart. Now, the Heavenly Principles found out about this betrayal and decided to permanently fire the angels, but humanity needed someone to act as their guides, so they cursed the angels only after creating the gods of old to replace them. At the same time, the Heavenly Principles both destroyed the moons and sent down the Celestial Nails to fix the land and close the rifts through which the abyss was leaking into the world, and entire civilizations were wiped out in the process.
Suggestion.
There is a slight chance that the War of Funerary Flame ended with the destruction of the moons. In that case, the goddesses might have attempted the trilunar syzygy now, which offended the Heavenly Principles, reason why they then decided to destroy the moons.
Logic.
When it comes to the nails, one hit and froze Vendagnir, one carved the land created the chasm, one caused the fog on Surimi Island, one turned the entire rainforest of Sumeru into a desert, one is inexplicably in the Night Kingdom, and one destroyed Hyperborea, causing the endless winter of Snezhnaya. This means that Fontaine must have one as well, and it's probably in the Mount Esus area, where the people worshipped Egeria the most, which could mean that it's also what caused the floods used to punish Egeria and her Oceanid people. Out of curiosity, the nail in Sumeru used to be in the Sand Tornado, but we can't find it because Nabu Malikata used it to acquire the Abyss for Deshret, while the one on Surimi Island is also missing because Kapatsir might have used it to curse the people of the island. I'd love to be told what's the point of the one in Atlan though. Let's talk about the Descenders for a second. The Heavenly Principles are the first Descender because they reshaped that for the first time.
Logic.
Since the fourth Descender arrived 500 years ago and the third one arrived before the Archon War, so around 3000 years before, the second Descender, the only one we have nothing certain about, could have arrived around 3000 years before that, especially considering how Teyvat seems to work in some sort of cycles.
Deduction.
The second descender then might have arrived 6000 years ago, when a ton of stuff happened. Personally, I think that each descender has always come paired with a non-descender like Either and Lumine.
Question.
Who is the second descender?
Conjecture.
We basically have only two options for that time period. It's either Nibelung or the Voyager, or they are the pair we're looking for. The problem is that both kinda don't fit the description.
Logic.
A descender has always been someone who's not from Teyvat, who has a will strong enough to be able to challenge the whole world, which fits with Theratos being the Eon of Will, but even this description is technically not entirely reliable because it's what Renee thought, but we know he got a few things wrong, and he even believed someone from Teyvat could become a descender, or at least that was his copium. On the other hand though, it seems that a non-descender entity from beyond the sky can become a descender later, because Surtology told Skirk that she's not a descender yet. Anyway, Nibelung is one of the few entities that are actually from this planet, while the Voyager never really came to Teyvat, she only sent her mind.
Question.
Do you think her mind alone is enough to rival the entire world?
Suggestion.
Personally, I think she's the non-descender of the pair, which means that someone else was the actual descender. Considering the Karya was being built when the Nails descended, it could be that they had already started to bring in children from beyond the sky, so it could be Perinheri. But there's also a very interesting outlander that was in Salvindak near when the Nails descended, Emunglaukr. But sadly we can still just speculate. Now, sometime before the Archon War, the third descender arrived.
Conjecture.
If we're going with the descender pair theory, then I think the non-descender was Xbalanque for multiple reasons. He wasn't from Natlan, he was an outlander, who suddenly appeared in the world and not even fate foretold his arrival. He defeated a dragon sovereign, stole his authority, becoming a self-made pyro-archon, and he even forced the Shade to do what he wanted. Besides, Mawika still hasn't told us a secret only she knows, because she will tell us, right? Back to the third descender, we now know that the Hyperboreans called him Saarelainen, and he rode his starry steed over Hisi Island and Pohjola to ask Pakesuko for his daughter's hand. Pakesuko instead told him to open the gate of Pohjola for him, or his daughter would have been punished as a result. So Saarelainen did that, fully aware that it was the fastest way to be punished by the Heavenly Principles, who then turned him into the Seven Gnoses.
Logic.
Pakesuko is not the Belly Tsar, and his daughter is not the Tsaritsa. The Tsaritsa began acquiring the Gnoses after the Cataclysm, when something happened to her and she decided to rebel against the Heavenly Principles counseled by Pierro, while Saarelainen's story happened before the Archon War, which means that she's definitely not trying to bring her lover back to life, otherwise she would have started 3000 years before and the Cataclysm would have had nothing to do with why she changed. Besides, do you really think that the Frost Moon Science would have defined the Cryo-Archon, the ruler of all Fae, as a mere servant of Hyperborea?
Question.
What is Pohjola?
Deduction.
Well, if going there is so forbidden that even the Heavenly Principles woke up, then maybe it's the floating island of Celestia on which there is a massive gate, at least in the manga.
Conjecture.
Going back to who Saarelainen might be, although we can't be sure, we do know of a hero of Snezhnaya who achieved a lot of incredible feats, Ajax, and we also know that he was in love with Sniegurochka, who might be Pakesuko's daughter at this point.
Prediction.
We read how Saarelainen traveled on his starry steed, and that really makes me think that we're talking about the only horse we actually know that exists in Teyvat, Zebai. who has some apparent connection to the moon goddesses and to Istaroth. Moving on.
Question.
What are the Gnoses and why did the Archon War happen?
Logic.
In Nevelet's vision story, the Heavenly Principles could no longer suppress the original order of the world, and the gods of old are defined as fragments of the primordial devouring each other.
Deduction.
Because the Heavenly Principles had been damaged, the dragons were about to retrieve their authority, so they decided to turn 7 gods into Archons, to definitely replace the sovereigns. Much like in Rare's case, the fragments of the stolen authorities were naturally drawn to each other, so in the end, these 5 gods acquired those stolen authorities, which then became the basis of the authorities of the Archons.
Logic.
Excluding Snezhnaya for a lack of info, this applies to every nation except for Natlan and Fontaine. Xuquatl never lost its authority, so it was never fragmented, reason why there have never been gods in Natlan, while Egeria was given the water authority right away to trick the Primordial Sea, preventing the real water dragon from coming back to life. It's no coincidence that we've never heard of another god in Fontaine, except for Remus, who came from Sumeru.
Conjecture.
The Gnoses might not be just the remains of the third Ascender. As we read in Egeria's story, she was given a shard of one who was first, which in Chinese is the exact same term used for the primordial ones, so this might be the reason why the sovereigns can't reclaim their authorities as long as an Archon exists. Although it might be talking about the original water dragon and they made a poor choice of words. Before the last chapter, we need to briefly address something about Before Sun and Moon.
Question.
What are the Heavenly Principles trying to hide from the world?
Logic.
Orobashi and the people of Enkanomiya were sentenced to death because they knew the history of Teyvat recorded in Before Sun and Moon, and to most players this simply means that they are trying to hide the fact that they stole a world that used to belong to the dragons.
Conjecture.
If they wanted to simply hide this fact, they wouldn't have let the sovereigns roam freely in the human realm, especially Apep, Xuquatl, and above all Nibelung, who came back to life when the Heavenly Principles woke up for the Archon War. I mean, the Heavenly Principles could have thrown them beyond the fake sky like the moons, or at the very least actively tried to defeat them as soon as they were reborn, and if they couldn't, they could have tasked the Shades. Instead, they did nothing, so there was literally nothing stopping the dragons from simply spilling the beans to the humans, especially since some of them even befriended them, like Nevelet, who even got his full memory back in the end.
Probability.
The Heavenly Principles might be trying to keep the Primordial One hidden from the world, especially if she actually became the ruler of the Abyss, but I'm aware that this still doesn't explain why the dragon never spoke of the Primordial One. To conclude this video, let's check the mural in the domains to understand the structure of Teyvat, but also because there's something I just figured out.
Logic.
The mural depicts the War of Funerary Flame. We see the Eternal Throne with 4 things surrounded that may or may not be the Shades, then Nibelung fighting against it since the dragons fought in space, then the egg with a tripartite world inside, so Teyvat split into 3 realms, one of which the human realm was broken by Nibelung, and also a winged being, which should be the Heavenly Principles. Around the egg there are 6 eyes, which could be 3 moons and 3 shades, since both Hyposelenia and Asmodee are missing, and then there's the infamous big ball underneath, linked to Teyvat by a sparrow.
Conjecture.
I've always said that the big ball was the old world of the dragons sending materials into the egg to create Teyvat, but it could be the other way around. Teyvat is sending stuff out, although we don't know if that ball is a new world or something else.
Question.
What's the structure of Teyvat like?
Logic.
From Skirk's video we saw something being slashed, and I think it was the egg. Then we see the fake sky, but when she enters Teyvat, she had to go through a thick layer or a cloak of clouds before finally being inside the human realm.
Suggestion.
We've never seen those clouds in the sky, but I have reasons to believe that those are right above Snezhnaya, and above them are the pillars we see in the loading screen.
Deduction.
Snezhnaya is the place where the Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies takes place, and it's defined as the faraway land of night, which means that those clouds from which the celestial nails came down are constantly blocking the sun in Snezhnaya, which is also the reason why we've always seen it at night. And by the way, I also have a theory according to which the Belgian Tsar was trying to create a sun specifically for Snezhnaya, link is in the description. Of course, we did see the stars in Snezhnaya, so that should be impossible, but do remember that the stars are not distant suns in the universe, they're Irminsul fruits, so they probably hang lower than those clouds.
Conclusion.
And that's it, I hope you liked the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, and if you're interested in Genshin Impact Theory videos, consider subscribing. As for my next video, I'll try to make one about the Luna IV livestream, but I can't promise you anything since the update is right around the corner. Well then, thank you so much for watching, Happy New Year again, and until next time, over and out.